There you go. That was a not yet that I was saying to you. Sorry, Lemon. Hang on, try and get this straight. Because of the chapter we're reading today, it'll make sense in a minute. Well, and once we get on a bit further. Oh, goodness me. I'm missing my little bit of grey hair that usually hangs out one side. I'm going to have to get used to wearing this when I do this sort of thing. No, still can't. Hello, everybody. I'm just watching myself in the screen over there. There's a bit of grey hair. There you go. So you know it's still me. Cheap wigs from the gold coin shop. There you go. Excuse me. Try not to let it tickle me too much. Overstimulating. Today we have another chapter from The Wind and the Willows. Try and get this thing to stay on. It is chapter 8 and it's called... Get ourselves sorted. Toad's Adventures. And if you've read the story, you'll know where this one's going, which is why I'm wearing a disguise. Hello, everybody. Good to see you here. I do hope you have your drink of water. It doesn't have to be in a bottle like mine. But don't forget, drink more water. Goodness me. I'm sure they look better than that in the store when I tried it on. No, did I try it on? I don't know. Anyway, there you go. That'll do. Doesn't matter. So, we're going to read Toad's Adventures, which is the next chapter, which is chapter 8 in The Wind and the Willows, in our ongoing read-through. So here we go. Toad's Adventures. When Toad found himself immured in a dank and noisome dungeon... Oh, did you bring your piece of paper and a pen or pencil to write down the weird words that are very old-fashioned ones, really, so you can look them up? We'll carry on. When Toad found himself immured in a dank and noisome dungeon, and knew that all the grim darkness of a medieval fortress lay between him and the outer world of sunshine and well-metalled high roads where he had lately been so happily disporting himself as if he had bought up every road in England, he flung himself at full length on the floor and shed bitter tears and abandoned himself in dark despair. "This is the end of everything," he said. "At least it is the end of the career of Toad, which is the same thing. The popular and handsome Toad, the rich and hospitable Toad, the Toad so free and careless and debonair. How can I hope to ever set at large again," he said, "who have been imprisoned so justly for stealing so handsome a motor car in such an audacious manner, and for such lurid and imaginative cheek bestowed upon such a number of fat, red-faced policemen." Here his sobs choked him. "Stupid animal that I was," he said. "Now I must languish in this dungeon till people who are proud to say they knew me have forgotten the very name of Toad." "Oh, wise old badger," he said. "Oh, clever, intelligent rat and sensible mole. What sound judgments, what a knowledge of men and matters you possess. Oh, unhappy and forsaken Toad." With lamentations such as these, he passed his days and nights for several weeks, refusing his meals or intermediate light refreshments, though the grim and ancient jailer, knowing that Toad's pockets were well lined, frequently pointed out that many comforts and indeed luxuries could by arrangements be sent in at a price from outside. Sorry, the wig's a little itchy. Now the jailer had a daughter, a pleasant wench and good-hearted, who assisted her father in the lighter duties of his post. She was particularly fond of animals, and besides her canary, whose cage hung on a nail in the massive wall of the keep by day, to the great annoyance of prisoners who relished an after-dinner nap, and was shrouded in an antimacassar on the parlour table at night. That's a type of cloth covering, which you need to look up because it comes from something else. She kept several piebald mice and a restless, revolving squirrel. This kind-hearted girl, pitying the misery of Toad, said to her father one day, "Father, I can't bear to see that poor beast so unhappy and getting so thin. You let me have the managing of him. You know how fond of animals I am. I'll make him eat from my hand and sit up and do all sorts of things." Her father replied that she could do what she liked with him. He was tired of Toad and his sulks and his airs and his meanness. So that day she went on her errand of mercy and knocked on the door of Toad's cell. Antimacassar, SSAR at the end. Her father replied that she could do what she liked with him. He was tired of Toad, I'm just going back over that so we get where we're up to, and his sulks and his airs and his meanness. So that day she went on her errand of mercy and knocked at the door of Toad's cell. "Now cheer up, Toad," she said coaxingly on entering, "and sit up and dry your eyes and be a sensible animal. And do try to eat a bit of dinner. See, I've brought you some of mine, hot from the oven." It was bubble and squeak between two plates, and its fragrance filled the narrow cell. The penetrating smell of cabbage reached the nose of Toad as he lay prostrate in his misery on the floor, and gave him the idea for a moment that perhaps life was not such a blank and desperate thing as he had imagined. But still he wailed and kicked with his legs and refused to be comforted. Sounds a bit like some small children we know. So the wise girl retired for the time, but of course a good deal of the smell of hot cabbage remained behind, as it will do, and Toad, between his sobs, sniffed and reflected, and gradually began to think new and inspiring thoughts of chivalry and poetry and deeds still to be done, of broad meadows and cattle browsing in them, raked by the sun and wind, of kitchen gardens and straight herb borders and warm snapdragon beset by bees. Snapdragons are a type of flowers. I'm just going to interrupt myself. Antimacassar, Antimacassar. I think that's how it is. So give it a try. Ugh, sorry. It really is itchy. Just as well I don't have a lot of other things irritating me at the moment. Okay. Warm snapdragons beset by bees, and of the comforting clink of dishes set down on the table at Toad Hall, and the scrape of chair legs on the floor as everyone pulled himself close up to his work. The air of the narrow cell took a rosy tinge, and he began to think of his friends and how they would surely be able to do something, of lawyers and how they would have enjoyed his case, and what an ass he had been not to get in a few lawyers. And lastly, he thought of his own great cleverness and resource and all that he was capable of if he only gave his great mind to it, and the cure was almost complete. When the girl returned some hours later, she carried a tray with a cup of fragrant tea steaming on it, and a plate piled up with very hot buttered toast, cut thick, very brown on both sides, with the butter running through the holes in it in great golden drops like honey from the honeycomb. The smell of that buttered toast simply talked to Toad, and with no uncertain voice, talked of warm kitchens, of breakfasts on bright frosty mornings, of cosy parlour firesides on winter evenings, when one's ramble was over and slippered feet were propped on the fender, of the purring of contented cats and the twitter of sleepy canaries. Toad sat up on end once more, dried his eyes, sipped his tea, and munched his toast, and soon began talking freely about himself and the house he lived in, and his doings there, and how important he was, and what a lot his friends thought of him. The gaoler's daughter saw that the topic was doing him as much good as the tea, and indeed it was, and encouraged him to go on. "Tell me about Toad Hall," said she. "It sounds beautiful." "Toad Hall," said the Toad proudly, "is an eligible, self-contained gentleman's residence, very unique, dating in part from the 14th century. But replete with every modern convenience, up-to-date sanitation, 5 minutes from church, post office and golf links, suitable for—" "Bless the animal," said the girl, laughing. "I don't want to take it. Tell me something real about it. But first wait till I fetch you some more tea and toast. Doesn't freshly toasted toast, especially when it's just been buttered, smell wonderful? We used to have some people flatting with us who would come in and late at night, because they worked until late, and they would toast up a whole loaf of bread and butter it and sit there chatting quietly and eating toast. And the smell of the nice hot fresh toast was so yummy. So I think I can understand why it got to Toad. I'll fetch you some more tea and toast. She tripped away and presently returned with a fresh trayful, and Toad, pitching into the toast with avidity, his spirits quite restored to their usual level, told her about the boathouse and the fish pond and the old walled kitchen garden, and about the pigsties and the stables and the pigeon house and the hen house, and about the dairy and the wash house and the china cupboards and the linen presses. She liked that bit especially. That's a cupboard that you store your linen in, a linen press. And about the banqueting hall and the fun they had there when the other animals were gathering round the table, and Toad was at his best, singing songs, telling stories, carrying on generally. Then she wanted to know about his animal friends, and was very interested in all he had to tell her about them, and how they lived, and what they did to pass their time. Of course, she did not say she was fond of animals as pets, because she had the sense to see that Toad would be extremely offended. When she said good night, having filled his water jug and shaken up his straw for him, Toad was very much the same sanguine, self-satisfied animal that he had been of old. He sang a little song or two, of the sort he used to sing at his dinner parties, curled himself up in the straw, and had an excellent night's rest, and the pleasantest of dreams. They had many interesting talks together after that, as the dreary days went on, and the gaoler's daughter grew very sorry for Toad, and thought it a great shame that a poor little animal should be locked up in prison for what seemed to her a very trivial offence. Toad, of course, in his vanity, thought that her interest in him proceeded from a growing tenderness, and he could not help half regretting that the social gulf between them was so very wide. For she was a comely lass, and evidently admired him very much. Yes, you're quite right. This Toad would have been a great hobbit. One morning the girl was very thoughtful, and answered at random, and did not seem to Toad to be paying proper attention to his witty sayings and sparkling comments. "Toad," she said presently, "just listen, please. I have an aunt who is a washerwoman." "There, there," said Toad graciously and affably. "Never mind, think no more about it. I have several aunts who ought to be washerwomen." "Do be quiet a minute, Toad," said the girl. "You talk too much. That's your chief fault, and I'm trying to think, and you hurt my head. As I said, I have an aunt who is a washerwoman. She does the washing for all the prisoners in this castle. We try to keep any paying business of that sort in the family, you understand. She takes out the washing on Monday mornings, and brings it in on Friday evenings. This is a Thursday. Now this is what occurs to me. You are very rich. At least you're always telling me so. And she is very poor. A few pounds wouldn't make any difference to you, and it would mean a lot to her. Now I think if she were properly approached, squared, I believe is the word you animals use, you could come to some arrangement by which she could let you have her dress and bonnet and so on, and you could escape from the castle as the official washerwoman. You're very alike in many respects, particularly about the figure." "We're not," said the Toad in a huff. "I have a very elegant figure for what I am." "So has my aunt," replied the girl, "for what she is. But have it your own way, you horrid, proud, ungrateful animal, when I'm sorry for you and trying to help you." Yes, that's all right. Thank you very much indeed," said the Toad hurriedly. "But look here, you wouldn't surely have Mr. Toad of Toad Hall going about the country disguised as a washerwoman?" "Then you can stop here as a toad," replied the girl with much spirit. "I suppose you want to go off in a coach and four." Honest Toad was always ready to admit himself in the wrong. "You are a good, kind, clever girl," he said, "and I'm indeed a proud and stupid Toad. Introduce me to your worthy aunt, if you will be so kind, and I have no doubt that the excellent lady and I will be able to arrange terms satisfactory to both parties." Next evening the girl ushered her aunt into the Toad's cell, bearing his week's washing pinned up in a towel. The old lady had been prepared beforehand for the interview, and the sight of certain gold sovereigns that Toad had thoughtfully placed on the table in full view practically completed the matter, and left little further to discuss. In return for his cash, Toad received a cotton print gown, an apron, a shawl, and a rusty black bonnet. That means it's quite worn out and fading around the edges. That's an old description. The only stipulation the old lady made was being that she should be gagged and bound and dumped down in a corner. By this not very conniving artifice, she explained, aided by picturesque fiction which she could supply herself, she hoped to retain her situation in spite of the suspicious appearance of things. Sounds like she's been thinking about this a little too much. Toad was delighted with the suggestion. It would enable him to leave the prison in some style, and with his reputation for being a desperate and dangerous fellow untarnished, and he readily helped the jailer's daughter to make her aunt appear, as much as possible, the victim of circumstances over which she had no control. "Now it's your turn, Toad," said the girl. "Take off that coat and waistcoat of yours. You're fat enough as it is." Shaking with laughter, she proceeded to hook and eye him into his garment and into the cotton print gown. Sorry, my eyes jump around sometimes. Arranged the shawl in a professional fold and tied the strings of the rusty bonnet under his chin. "You're the very image of her," she giggled. "Only I'm sure you'll never look half so respectable. You've never looked half so respectable in all your life. Now, goodbye, Toad, and good luck. Go straight down the way you came up, and if anyone says anything to you, as they probably will, being but men, you can chaff back a bit, of course, but remember you're a widow woman, quite alone in the world, with a character to lose." With a quaking heart, but as firm a footstep as he could command, Toad set forth cautiously on what seemed to be a most harebrained and hazardous undertaking, but he was soon agreeably surprised to find how easy everything was made for him, and a little humbled at the thought that both his popularity and the sex that seemed to inspire it were really another's. The washerwoman's squat figure, in its familiar cotton print, seemed a passport for every barred door and grim gateway. Even when he hesitated, uncertain as to the right turning to take, he found himself helped out of his difficulty by the warder at the next gate, anxious to be off to his tea, summoning him to come along sharp and not keep him waiting there all night. The chaff and the humorous sallies to which he was subjected, and to which, of course, he had to provide prompt and effective reply, formed indeed his chief danger, for Toad was an animal with a strong sense of his own dignity, and the chaff was mostly, he thought, poor and clumsy, and the humour of the sallies entirely lacking. However, he kept his temper, though with great difficulty, suited his retorts to his company and his supposed character, and did his best not to overstep the limits of good taste. It seemed hours before he crossed the last courtyard, rejected the pressing invitations from the last guardroom, and dodged the outstretched arms of the last warder, pleading with simulated passion for just one farewell embrace. But at last he heard the wicket gate and the great outer door click behind him, felt the fresh air of the outer world upon his anxious brow, and knew that he was free. Dizzy with the easy success of his Dizzy with the easy success of his daring exploit, he walked quickly towards the lights of the town, not knowing in the least where he should go, what he should do next, only quite certain of one thing, that he must remove himself as quickly as possible from the neighbourhood where the lady he was forced to represent was so well known and so popular a character. As he walked along, considering, his attention was caught by some red and green lights a little way off, to one side of the town, and the sound of the puffing and snorting of engines and the banging of shunted trucks fell on his ear. "Aha," he thought, "this is a piece of luck. A railway station is the thing I want most in the whole world at this moment, and what's more, I needn't go through the town to get it, and shan't have to support this humiliating character by repartees which, though thoroughly effective, do not assist one's sense of self-respect." He made his way to the station accordingly, consulted a timetable, and found that a train bound more or less in the direction of his home was due to start in half an hour. More luck, said Toad, his spirits rising rapidly, and went off to the booking office to buy his ticket. He gave the name of the station that he knew to be nearest to the village, of which Toad Hall was the principal feature, and mechanically put his fingers, in search of the necessary money, where his waistcoat pocket should have been. But here the cotton gown, which had nobly stood by him so far, and which he had basely forgotten, intervened and frustrated his efforts. In a sort of nightmare, he struggled with the strange, uncertain, uncanny thing that seemed to hold his hands, turn all muscular strivings to water, and laugh at him all the time, while other travellers, forming up in a line behind, waited with impatience, making suggestions of more or less value and comments of more or less stringency and point. At last, somehow, he never rightly understood how, he burst the barriers, attained the goal, arrived at where all waistcoat pockets are eternally situated, and found not only no money, but no pocket to hold it, and no waistcoat to hold the pocket. To his horror, he recollected that he had left both coat and waistcoat behind him in his cell, and with them his pocketbook, money, keys, watch, matches, pencil case, all that makes life worth living, all that distinguishes the many-pocketed animal, the lord of creation, from the inferior one-pocketed or no-pocketed productions that hop or trip about permissively, unequipped for the real contest. In his misery, he made one desperate effort to carry the thing off, and with a return to his fine old manner, a blend of the squire and the college don, he said, "Look here, I find I've left my purse behind. Just give me that ticket, will you, and I'll send the money on tomorrow. I'm well known in these parts." The clerk stared at him and the rusty black bonnet a moment, and then laughed. "I should think you're pretty well known in these parts," he said, "if you've tried this game on often. Here, stand away from the window, please, ma'am. You're obstructing the other passengers." An old gentleman who had been prodding him in the back for some moments here thrust him away, and what was worse, addressed him as his good woman, which angered Toad more than anything that had occurred that evening. Baffled and full of despair, he wandered blindly down the platform where the train was standing, and tears trickled down each side of his nose. It was hard, he thought, to be within sight of safety and almost of home, to be balked by the want of a few wretched shillings, and by the pettifogging mistrustfulness of paid officials. Very soon his escape would be discovered. The hunt would be up. He would be caught, reviled, loaded with chains, dragged back again to prison, and bread and water and straw. His guards and penalties would be doubled. And oh, what sarcastic remarks the girl would make! What was to be done? He was not swift of foot. His figure was unfortunately recognizable. Could he not squeeze under the seat of a carriage? He had seen this method adopted by schoolboys when the journey money provided by thoughtful parents had been diverted to other and better ends. As he pondered, he found himself opposite the engine, which was being oiled, wiped, and generally caressed by its affectionate driver, a burly man with an oil can in one hand and a lump of cotton waste in the other. "Hello, mother," said the engine driver. "What's the trouble? You don't look particularly cheerful." "Oh, sir," said Toad, crying afresh, "I'm a poor unhappy washerwoman, and I've lost all my money, and I can't pay for a ticket, and I must get home tonight somehow, and whatever am I to do, I don't know. Oh dear, oh dear." "That's a bad business indeed," said the engine driver reflectively. "Lost your money and can't get home, and got some kids too waiting for you, I dare say." "Any amount of 'em," sobbed Toad, "and they'll be hungry and playing with matches and upsetting lamps, the little innocents, and quarrelling and going on generally. Oh dear, oh dear." "Well, I'll tell you what I'll do," said the good engine driver. You're a washerwoman to your trade, says you. Very well, that's that. And I'm an engine driver, as you well may see, and there's no denying it's terribly dirty work. Uses up a power of shirts, it does, till my missus is fair tired of washing 'em. If you'll wash a few shirts for me when you get home and send 'em along, I'll give you a ride on my engine. It's against the company's regulations, but we're not so very particular in these out-of-the-way parts." The toad's misery turned into rapture as he eagerly scrambled up into the cab of the engine. Of course, he had never washed a shirt in his life, and couldn't if he tried, and anyhow he wasn't going to begin. But he thought, when I get safely home to Toad Hall and have money again and pockets to put it in, I'll send the engine driver enough to pay for quite a quantity of washing, and that will be the same thing, or better. The guard waved his welcome flag, the engine driver whistled in cheerful response, and the train moved out of the station. As the speed increased and the toad could see on either side of him real fields and trees and hedges and cows and horses, all flying past him, and as he thought how every minute was bringing him nearer to Toad Hall, and sympathetic friends, and money to chink in his pocket, and a soft bed to sleep in, and good things to eat, and praise and admiration at the recital of his adventures and his surpassing cleverness, he began to skip up and down and shout and sing snatches of song, to the great astonishment of the engine driver, who had come across washerwomen before, at long intervals, but never one at all like this. They had covered many and many a mile, and Toad was already considering what he would have for supper, as soon as he got home, when he noticed that the engine driver, with a puzzled expression on his face, was leaning over the side of the engine and listening hard. Then he saw him climb onto the coals and gaze out over the top of the train. Then he returned and said to Toad, "That's very strange. We're the last train running in this direction tonight, yet I could be sworn that I heard another following us." Toad ceased his frivolous antics at once. He became grave and depressed, and a dull pain in the lower part of his spine communicated itself to his legs, made him want to sit down and try desperately not to think of all the possibilities. By this time the moon was shining brightly, and the engine driver, steadying himself on the coal, could command a view of the line behind them for a long distance. Presently he called out, "I can see it clearly now. It's an engine on our rails coming along at a great pace. It looks as if we're being pursued." The miserable Toad, crouched in the coal dust, tried hard to think of something to do, with dismal want of success. "They're gaining on us fast," cried the engine driver, "and the engine's crowded with the queerest lot of people, men like ancient warders waving halberds, policemen in their helmets waving truncheons, and shabbily dressed men in pot hats, obvious and unmistakable plainclothes detectives even at this distance, waving revolvers and walking sticks, all waving and all shouting the same thing, 'Stop! Stop! Stop!' Then Toad fell on his knees among the coals and raised his clasped paws in supplication, cried, 'Save me, only save me, dear kind Mr. Engine Driver, and I will confess everything. I'm not the simple washerwoman I seem to be. I have no children waiting for me, innocent or otherwise. I'm a Toad, the well-known and popular Mr. Toad, a landed proprietor. I've just escaped by my great daring and cleverness from a loathsome dungeon into which my enemies had flung me, and if those fellows on that engine recapture me, it will be chains and bread and water and straw and misery once more for poor, unhappy, innocent Toad." The engine driver looked down upon him very sternly and said, "Now tell the truth, what were you put in prison for?" "It was nothing very much," said the poor Toad, colouring deeply. "I only borrowed a motor car while the owners were at lunch. They had no need of it at the time. I didn't mean to steal it, really, but people, especially magistrates, take such harsh views of thoughtless and high-spirited actions." The engine driver looked very grave. And I fear that you may have been indeed a wicked Toad, and by rights I ought to give you up to the offended justice. But you are evidently in sore trouble and distress, so I will not desert you. I don't hold with motor cars for one thing, and I don't hold with being ordered about by policemen when I'm on my own engine for another. And the sight of an animal in tears always makes me feel queer and soft-hearted, so cheer up, Toad. I'll do my best, and we may beat them yet." They piled on more coals, shovelling furiously. The furnace roared, the sparks flew, the engine leapt and swung, but still their pursuers slowly gained. The engine driver, with a sigh, wiped his brow with a handful of cotton waste and said, "I'm afraid it's no good, Toad. You see, they're running light and they have the better engine. There's just one thing left for us to do, and it's your only chance. So attend very carefully to what I tell you. A short way ahead of us is a long tunnel, and on the other side of that line, the line passes through a thick wood. Now, I will put on all the speed I can while we're running through the tunnel, but the other fellows will slow down a bit naturally for fear of an accident. When we're through, I'll shut off the steam and put on the brakes as hard as I can, and the moment it's safe to do so, you must jump and hide in the wood before they get through the tunnel and see you. Then I will go full speed again, and they can chase me if they like for as long as they like and as far as they like. Now mind, and be ready to jump when I tell you." They piled on more coals, and the train shot into the tunnel, and the engine rushed and roared and rattled, till at last they shot out at the other end into fresh air and the peaceful moonlight, and saw the wood lying dark and helpful upon either side of the line. The driver shut off the steam and put on brakes. The Toad got down on the step, and as the train slowed down to almost a walking pace, he heard the driver call out, "Now jump!" The Toad jumped, rolled down a short embankment, picked himself up unhurt, and scrambled into the wood and hid. Peeping out, he saw his train get up speed again and disappear at a great pace. Then out of the tunnel burst the pursuing engine, roaring and whistling, her motley crew waving their various weapons and shouting, "Stop! Stop! Stop!" When they were past, the Toad had a hearty laugh for the first time since he was thrown into prison. But he soon stopped laughing when he came to consider that it was now very late and dark and cold, and he was in an unknown wood with no money and no chance of supper, and still far from friends and home, and the dead silence of everything. After the roar and rattle of the train was something of a shock. He dared not leave the shelter of the trees, so he struck into the wood with the idea of leaving the railway as far behind him as possible. After so many weeks within walls, he found the wood strange and unfriendly, and inclined, he thought, to make fun of him. Nightjars, that's a type of bird, nightjars sounding their mechanical rattle, made him think the wood was full of searching warders, closing in on him. An owl, swooping noiselessly towards him, brushed his shoulder with its wing, making him jump with the horrid certainty that it was a hand, then flitted off, moth-like, laughing its low ho, 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 which Toad thought in very poor taste. Once he met a fox who stopped, looked him up and down in a sarcastic sort of way and said, "Hello, washerwoman, half a pair of socks and a pillowcase short this week. Mind it doesn't occur again," and swaggered off sniggering. Toad looked about for a stone to throw at him, but could not succeed in finding one, which vexed him more than anything. At last, cold, hungry, and tired out, he sought the shelter of a hollow tree, where with branches and dead leaves he made himself as comfortable a bed as he could, and slept soundly till morning. And that is the end of chapter 8. And now I can take the wig off. Disguise is finished with for now. Oh, they are hot. Sorry about that. Now I can catch up on what you've been chatting about. Oh my goodness, all that chatting. Yes, sorry people, we do actually have some language filters on the chat channel, just so that if there are people who are watching who've got small children, they're not going to be having to explain about naughty words to them. As adults, when we're talking to one another, we can use words quite safely, and they don't mean particularly negative things if we're joking about stuff, but often children will get the wrong end of the stick and then use them inappropriately. So we've got some fairly heavy spam filters on the chat. So if you find that you make a comment and it gets deleted, don't be offended. We're just looking after the little kids in case they end up listening to the stories at some other time, because the chat is also still visible in the recordings. Yes, it was actually on TV at one stage. There's been several different versions of it. There's also been a movie. In fact, Phil, my husband, and Anita and Joel, our daughter and son, lived in a house that was used. Part of the house was used to represent Toad Hall, or the stable courtyard of Toad Hall, and we were there when they were filming the live action movie of it. So that was a lot of fun watching what was going on with that. I remember seeing the canary coloured caravan in the courtyard down below us. Also, we can talk about Mama Jev reading with this wig on. Yes, that's true. You can talk about it. I can put it back on again for other stories. Molly Weasley. Yeah, okay. No, you may not have said anything naughty, but the way the filter is set up, because the words have been imported from somebody else who does a lot of moderating on other lists and on other discussion boards, there are various combinations of letters that sometimes come across in different contexts as being inappropriate. It's all done via a program that runs it, rather than a person who's actually choosing to delete comments. So please don't be upset by that. Sorry about that. Yeah. Sorry about that, people. Yes. I have no idea what it is that's filtering out at the moment. I may be able to look at it and then do some modifications later to change it so that words that are okay are not going to be accidentally getting comments deleted. And unfortunately, if you keep trying to post something, if you do it too many times, it will give you a timeout. So give it a little bit of time and try talking about something else. Okay, so now we're back to reading again. Now that admin's out of the way. Chapter 9 of The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame is called Wayfarers All, and I shall carry on. And I've got no idea, somewhere. Oh yes, on here. I've got a clock on my iPad. Little iPad mini, Mark 1 iPad mini. First generation. Wayfarers All. The water rat was helpless, and he did not exact... Oh, hang on, we haven't had our drink of water. How could you let me do that? Naughty, naughty, naughty. Here we go. Drink of water. Don't forget to have your drink between the chapters. You're allowed to drink, but during the chapters. But I find my mouth gets rather dry if I'm reading too long without a drink of water. Son of Jev is probably in the middle of playing a game with no hands at the moment. So that's why he's not here moderating today. Because he's practiced the game enough to be able to actually play it. So he and... can't remember the name. Are playing a team game online. A different stream. So otherwise he would be here and keep an eye on the modding. But yeah, I can probably look back through the records just to see what the problem is. Yep, we'll see you around, Lady of Leisure. Great having you here. And don't forget, if you do want to hear the rest of it, for 2 weeks after I broadcast, you can still watch the video on my channel. Otherwise, go over to YouTube. It will eventually be posted over there. I've got them scheduled to post, so they're usually a couple of weeks after I've actually read them over on YouTube. But you can also catch up on other readings I've done. So I'm going to carry on now. So thank you very much, people. Yes, no hands. And Swag's the other one that they're playing. Swagamuffin. Wayfarers All, Chapter 9. The water rat was restless, and he did not exactly know why. To all appearance, the summer's pomp was still at fullest height, and although in the tilled acres green had given way to gold, though rowans were reddening, and the woods were dashed here and there with a tawny fierceness, yet light and warmth and colour were still present in undiminished measure, clean of any chilly premonitions of the passing year. But the constant chorus of the orchards and hedges had shrunk to a casual evensong from a few yet unwearied performers. The robin was beginning to assert himself once more, and there was a feeling in the air of change and departure. The cuckoo, of course, had long been silent, but another feathered friend, for months a part of the familiar landscape and its small society, was missing too, and it seemed that the ranks thinned steadily day by day. Rat, ever observant of all winged movement, saw that it was taking daily a southing tendency. That's the birds were flying south. And even as he lay in bed at night, he thought he could make out, passing in the darkness overhead, the beat and quiver of impatient pinions, obedient to the peremptory call. Pinions are a type of flight feather, and peremptory is it's like command. You can't say no to it. You have to go and do it. So, yeah, old words. The beat and quiver of impatient pinions, obedient to the peremptory call. Nature's grand hotel has its season, like the others, as the guests one by one pack, pay, and depart, and the seats at the table d'hote shrink pitifully at each succeeding meal. As suites of rooms are closed, carpets taken up, and waiters sent away, those boarders who are staying on pension, until the next year's full reopening, cannot help being somewhat affected by all these flittings and farewells, this eager discussion of plans, routes, and fresh quarters, this daily shrinkage in the stream of comradeship. One gets unsettled, depressed, and inclined to be querulous. Why this craving for change? Why not stay on quietly here like us and be jolly? You don't know this hotel out of season, and what fun we have among ourselves, we fellows who remain and see the whole interesting year out. All very true, no doubt, the others always reply. We quite envy you, and some other year perhaps, but just now we have engagements. And there's a bus at the door, our time is up. And so they depart, with a smile and a nod, and we miss them and feel resentful. The rat was a self-sufficing sort of animal, rooted to the land, and whoever went, he stayed. Still, he could not help noticing what was in the air, and feeling some of its influence in his bones. It was difficult to settle down to anything seriously with all this flitting going on. Leaving the waterside where rushes stood thick and tall in a stream that was becoming sluggish and low, he wandered countrywards across a field or two of pasturage, already looking dusty and parched, and thrust into the great sea of wheat, yellow, wavy, and murmurous, full of quiet motion and small whisperings. Here he often loved to wander through the forest of stiff, strong stalks that carried their own golden sky away. Over his head, a sky that was always dancing, shimmering, softly talking, or swaying strongly to the passing wind, and recovering itself with a toss and a merry laugh. Here, too, he had many small friends, a society complete in itself, leading full and busy lives, but always with a spare moment to gossip and exchange news with a visitor. Today, however, though they were civil enough, the field mice and harvest mice seemed preoccupied. Many were digging and tunnelling busily, others gathered together in small groups, examining plans and drawings of small flats, stated to be desirable and compact, and situated conveniently near the stores. Some were hauling out dusty trunks and dress baskets, others were already elbow deep in packing their belongings, while everywhere piles and bundles of wheat, oats, barley, beech mast, and nuts lay about, ready for transport. That's all their food that they're storing up for winter. "Here's old Ratty," they cried as soon as they saw him. "Come and bear a hand, Rat, and don't stand about idle." "What sort of games are you up to?" said the water rat severely. "You know it isn't time to be thinking of winter quarters yet, by a long way." "Oh yes, we know that," explained a field mouse rather shamefacedly, "but it's always as well to be in good time, isn't it? We really must get all the furniture and baggage and stores moved out of this before those horrid machines begin clicking round the fields, and then you know the best flats get picked up so quickly nowadays, and if you're late you have to put up with anything, and they want such a lot of doing up too before they're fit to move into. Of course, we're early, we know that, but we're only just making a start." "Oh, bother starts," said the rat. "It's a splendid day. Come for a row or a stroll along the hedges or a picnic in the woods or something." "Well, I think not today, thank you," replied the field mouse hurriedly. "Perhaps some other day when we've more time." The rat, with a snort of contempt, swung round to go, tripped over a hat box, and fell
with undignified remarks. "If people would be more careful," said a field mouse rather stiffly, "and look where they're going, people wouldn't hurt themselves and forget themselves." "Mind that hold, all rat. You'd better sit down somewhere. In an hour or two we may be more free to attend to you." "You won't be free, as you call it, much this side of Christmas, I can see that," retorted the rat grumpily as he picked his way out of the field. He returned somewhat despondently to his river again, his faithful, steady-going old river, which never packed up, flitted, or went into winter quarters. In the osiers which fringed the bank he spied a swallow sitting. Presently it was joined by another, and then by a third, and the birds, fidgeting restlessly on their bough, talked together earnestly and low. "What, already?" said the rat, strolling up to them. "What's the hurry? I call it simply ridiculous." "Oh, we're not off yet, if that's what you mean," replied the first swallow. "We're only making plans and arranging things, talking it over, you know, what route we're taking this year and where we'll stop and so on. That's half the fun." "Fun?" said the rat. "Now that's just what I don't understand. If you've got to leave this pleasant place and your friends who will miss you, and your snug homes that you've settled into, why, when the hour strikes, I've no doubt you'll go bravely and face all the trouble and discomfort and change and newness and make believe that you're not very unhappy. But to want to talk about it or even think about it till you really need—" "No, you don't understand naturally," said the second swallow. "First we feel it stirring within us, a sweet unrest. Then back come the recollections one by one like homing pigeons. They flutter through our dreams at night. They fly with us in our wheelings and circlings by day. We hunger to inquire of each other, to compare notes, and assure ourselves that it was all really true, as one by one the scents and sounds and names of long-forgotten places come gradually back and beckon to us." "Couldn't you stop on for just this year?" suggested the water rat wistfully. "We'll all do our best to make you feel at home. You've no idea what good times we have here while you are far away." "I tried stopping on one year," said the third swallow. "I had grown so fond of the place that when the time came I hung back and let the others go on without me. For a few weeks it was all well enough, but afterwards, oh, the weary length of the nights! The shivering, sunless days, the air so clammy and chill, and not an insect in an acre of it. No, it was no good. My courage broke down, and one cold, stormy night I took wing, flying well inland on account of the strong easterly gales. It was snowing hard as I beat through the passes of the great mountains, and I had a stiff fight to win through. But never shall I forget the blissful feeling of the hot sun against my back as I sped down to the lakes that lay so blue and placid below me, and the taste of my first fat insect. The past was like a bad dream. The future was all happy holiday as I moved southwards week by week, easily, lazily, lingering as long as I dared, but always heeding the call. No, I had had my warning. Never again did I think of disobedience." "Ah, yes, the call of the south, twittered the other two dreamily. "Its songs, its hues, its radiant air. Oh, do you remember?" And forgetting the rat, they slid into passionate reminiscence, while he listened, fascinated, and his heart burned within him. In himself, too, he knew that it was vibrating at last, that chord hitherto dormant and unsuspected, the mere chatter of these southern-bound birds, their pale and second-hand reports, had yet power to awaken this wild new sensation and thrill him through and through with it. What would one moment of the real thing work in him? One passionate touch of the real southern sun, one waft of the authentic odour. With closed eyes he dared to dream a moment in full abandonment, and when he looked again the river seemed steely and chill, the green fields grey and lightless. Then his loyal heart seemed to cry out on his weaker self for its treachery. "Why do you ever come back, then, at all?" he demanded of the swallows jealously. "What do you find to attract you in this poor drab little country?" "And do you think," said the first swallow, "that the other call is not for us too in its due season? The call of lush meadow grass, wet orchards, warm insect-haunted ponds, of browsing cattle, of haymaking, and all the farm buildings clustering around the house of the perfect eaves?" "Do you suppose," asked the second one, "that you are the only living thing that craves with a hungry longing to hear the cuckoo's note again?" "In due time," said the third, "we shall be homesick once more for quiet water lilies, swaying on the surface of an English stream. But today all that seems pale and thin and very far away. Just now our blood dances to another music." They fell a-twittering among themselves once more, and this time their intoxicating babble was of violet seas, tawny sands, and lizard-haunted walls. Restlessly the rat wandered off once more, climbed the slope that rose gently from the north bank of the river, and lay looking out towards the great ring of downs that barred his vision further southwards, his simple horizon hitherto, his mountains of the moon, his limit behind which lay nothing he had cared to see or to know. To him, gazing south with a newborn need stirring in his heart, the clear sky over their long, low outline seemed to pulsate with promise. Today the unseen was everything, the unknown the only real fact of life. On this side of the hills was now the real blank. On the other lay the crowded and coloured panorama that his inner eye was seeing so clearly. What seas lay beyond, green, leaping and crested, what sun-bathed coasts along which the white villas glittered against the olive woods, what quiet harbours thronged with gallant shipping bound for purple islands of wine and spice, islands set low in languorous waters. He rose and descended riverwards once more, then changed his mind and sought the side of the dusty lane. There, lying half buried in the thick, cool, under-hedge tangle that bordered it, he could muse on the metalled road, and all the wondrous world that it led to, on all the wayfarers too that might have trodden it, and the fortunes and adventures they had gone to seek or found unseeking, out there beyond. Footsteps fell on his ear, and the figure of one that walked somewhat wearily came into view. He saw that it was a rat, and a very dusty one. The wayfarer, as he reached him, saluted with a gesture of courtesy that had something foreign about it, hesitated a moment, then with a pleasant smile turned from the track and sat down by his side in the cool herbage. He seemed tired, and the rat let him rest unquestioned, understanding something of what was in his thoughts, knowing too the value all animals attach at times to mere silent companionship, when the weary muscles slacken and the mind marks time. The wayfarer was lean and keen-featured, and somewhat bowed at the shoulders. His paws were thin and long, his eyes much wrinkled at the corners, and he wore small gold earrings in his neatly set, well-shaped ears. His knitted jersey was of a faded blue. His breeches, patched and stained, were based on a blue foundation, and his small belongings that he carried were tied up in a blue cotton handkerchief. When he had rested a while, the stranger sighed, snuffed the air, and looked about him. "That was clover, that warm whiff on the breeze," he remarked, "and those are cows we hear cropping the grass behind us and blowing softly between mouthfuls. There is a sound of distant reapers, and yonder rises a blue line of cottage smoke against the woodland. The river runs somewhere close by, for I hear the call of a moorhen, and I see by your build that you're a freshwater mariner. Everything seems asleep, and yet going on all the time. It is a goodly life that you lead, friend, no doubt the best in all the world, if only you are strong enough to lead it." "Yes, it's the life, the only life to live," responded the water rat dreamily, and without his usual wholehearted conviction. "I did not say exactly that," replied the stranger cautiously, "but no doubt it's the best. I've tried it, and I know, and because I've tried it, 6 months of it, and know it's the best, here am I, footsore and hungry, tramping away from it tramping southwards, following the old call back to the old life, the life which is mine, and which will not let me go. Is this then yet another of them? Mused the rat. And where have you just come from? He asked. He hardly dared to ask where he was bound for he seemed to know the answer only too well. Nice little farm, replied the wayfarer briefly. Up along in that direction, he nodded northwards. Never mind about it. I had everything I could want, everything I had any right to expect of life, and more. And here I am, glad to be here all the same, glad to be here. So many miles further on the road, so many hours nearer to my heart's desire. His shining eyes held fast to the horizon, and he seemed to be listening for some sound that was wanting from that inland acreage, vocal as it was with the cheerful music of pasturage and farmyard. You're not one of us, said the water rat, nor yet a farmer, nor even, I should judge, of this country. Right, replied the stranger. I'm a seafaring rat, I am, and the port I originally hail from is Constantinople, though I'm a sort of foreigner there too, in a manner of speaking. You will have heard of Constantinople, friend, a fair city and an ancient and glorious one, and you may have heard too of Sigurd, king of Norway, and how he sailed thither with 60 ships, and how he and his men rode up through streets all canopied in their honour with purple and gold, and how the emperor and empress came down and banqueted with him on board his ship. When Sigurd returned home, many of his Northmen remained behind and entered the emperor's bodyguard. And my ancestor, a Norwegian-born, stayed behind too, with the ships that Sigurd gave the emperor. Seafarers we have ever been, and no wonder. As for me, the city of my birth is no more my home than any pleasant port between there and the London River. I know them all, and they know me. Set me down on any of their quays or foreshores, and I am home again. I suppose you go great voyages, said the water rat with growing interest, months and months out of sight of land, and provisions running short, and allowance as to water, and your mind communing with the mighty ocean, and all that sort of thing. By no means, said the sea rat frankly. Such a life as you describe would not suit me at all. I'm in the coasting trade and rarely out of sight of land. It's the jolly times on shore that appeal to me as much as any seafaring. Oh, those southern seaports, the smell of them, the riding lights at night, the glamour. Riding lights are lights that boats put up in their rigging so that other boats can see where they are when they're coming into anchor at night, so they don't get run into. Well, perhaps you've chosen the better way, said the water rat, but rather doubtfully. Tell me something of your coasting then, if you have a mind to, and what sort of harvest an animal of spirit might hope to bring home from it to warm his latter days with gallant memories by the fireside. For my life, I confess to you, feels to me today somewhat narrow and circumscribed. My last voyage, began the sea rat, that landed me eventually in this country, bound with high hopes for my inland farm, will serve as a good example for any of them, and indeed as an epitome of... Sorry, there's a line break in there. It makes it a rather weird word with a line break in the middle. And indeed as an epitome of my highly coloured life. Family troubles as usual began it. The domestic storm cone was hoisted, and I shipped myself on board a small trading vessel bound from Constantinople by classic seas whose every wave throbs with a deathless memory to the Grecian islands and the Levant. Those were golden days and balmy nights. In and out of harbour all the time, old friends everywhere, sleeping in some cool temple or ruined cistern during the heat of day. Feasting and song after sundown, under great stars set in a velvet sky. Thence we turned and coasted up the Adriatic, its shores swimming in an atmosphere of amber, rose, and aquamarine. We lay in wide, landlocked harbours. We roamed through ancient and noble cities, until at last one morning, as the sun rose royally behind us, we rode into Venice, down a path of gold. Oh, Venice is a fine city, wherein a rat can wander at his ease and take his pleasure. or when weary of wandering can sit at the edge of the Grand Canal at night, feasting with his friends when the air is full of music and the sky full of stars and the lights flash and shimmer on the polished steel prows of the swaying gondolas, packed so that you can walk across the canal on them from side to side. And then the food. Do you like shellfish? Well, we won't linger over that now. He was silent for a time, and the water rat silent too, enthralled, floating on dream canals, and heard a phantom song pealing high between vaporous grey, wave-lapped walls. Southwards we sailed again at last, continued the sea rat, coasting down the Italian shore till finally we made Palermo, and there I quitted for a long happy spell on shore. I never stick too long to one ship. One gets narrow-minded and prejudiced. Besides, Sicily is one of my happy hunting grounds. I know everybody there, and they always just suit me. I spent many jolly weeks in the island, staying with friends up country. When I grew restless again, I took advantage of a ship that was trading to Sardinia and Corsica, and very glad I was to feel the fresh breeze and the sea spray in my face once more. But isn't it very hot and stuffy down in the hold, I think you call it? Asked the water rat. The seafarer looked at him with the suspicion of a wink. I'm an old hand, he remarked with much simplicity. The captain's cabin's good enough for me. It's a hard life by all accounts, murmured the rat, sunk in deep thought. For the crew it is, replied the seafarer gravely, again with the ghost of a wink. From Corsica, he went on, I made use of a ship that was taking wine to the mainland. We made Alassio in the evening, lay to, hauled up our wine casks and hove them overboard, tied one to the other by a long line. Then the crew took to the boats and rowed shorewards, singing as they went, and drawing after them the long bobbing procession of casks, like a mile of porpoises. On the sands they had horses waiting, which dragged the casks up the steep street of the little town with a fine rush and clatter and scramble. When the last cask was in, we went and refreshed and rested, and sat late into the night, drinking with our friends. And next morning I took to the great olive woods for a spell and a rest, for now I had done with islands for the time, and ports and shipping were plentiful. So I led a lazy life among the peasants, lying and watching them work, or stretched high on the hillside with the blue Mediterranean far below me, and so at length by easy stages and partly on foot, partly by sea, to Marseille, and the meeting of old shipmates and the visiting of great ocean-bound vessels, and feasting once more. Talk of shellfish. Why, sometimes I dream of the shellfish of Marseille and wake up crying. That reminds me, said the polite water rat. You happened to mention that you were hungry, and I ought to have spoken earlier. Of course, you will stop and take your midday meal with me. My hole is close by. It is some time past noon, and you are very welcome to whatever there is. Now I call that kind and brotherly of you, said the sea rat. I was indeed hungry when I sat down, and ever since I inadvertently happened to mention shellfish, my pangs have been extreme. But couldn't you fetch it along out here? I'm none too fond of going under hatches, unless I'm obliged to, and then, while we eat, I could tell you more concerning my voyages, and the pleasant life I lead. At least, it's very pleasant to me, and by your attention I judge it commends itself to you. Whereas, if we go indoors, it's 100 to 1 that I shall presently fall asleep. That indeed is an excellent suggestion, said the water rat, and hurried off home. There he got out the luncheon basket, and packed a simple meal in which, remembering the stranger's origin and preferences, he took care to include a yard of long French bread, a sausage out of which the garlic sang, some cheese which lay down and cried, and a long-necked straw-covered flask wherein lay bottled sunshine, shed and garnered on far southern slopes. Thus laden, he returned with all speed and blushed for pleasure at the old seaman's commendations of his taste and judgment, as together they unpacked the basket and laid out the contents on the grass by the roadside. The sea rat, as soon as his hunger was somewhat assuaged, continued the history of his latest voyage, conducting his simple hearer from port to port of Spain, landing him at Lisbon, Oporto, and Bordeaux, so that's now into Portugal and then into France, introducing him to the pleasant harbours of Cornwall and Devon in southern England, and so up the channel to that final quayside where, landing after winds long contrary, storm-driven and weather-beaten, he had caught the first magical hints and heraldings of another spring, and, fired by these, had sped on a long tramp inland, hungry for the experiment of life on some quiet farmstead, very far from the weary beating of any sea. Spellbound and quivering with excitement, the water-rat followed the adventurer league by league over stormy bays, through crowded roadsteads, across harbour bars on a racing tide, up winding rivers that hid their busy little towns round a sudden turn, and left him with a regretful sigh planted at his dull inland farm, about which he desired to hear nothing. By this time their meal was over, and the seafarer, refreshed and strengthened, his voice more vibrant, his eye lit with a brightness that seemed caught from some faraway sea beacon, filled his glass with the red and glowing vintage of the south, and leaned towards the water-rat, compelled his gaze, and held him body and soul while he talked. Those eyes were of the changing, foam-streaked grey-green of leaping northern seas. In the glass shone a hot ruby that seemed the very heart of the south, beating for him who had courage to respond to its pulsation. The twin lights, the shifting grey and the steadfast red, mastered the water-rat and held him bound, fascinated, powerless. The quiet world outside their rays receded far away and ceased to be. And the wonderful talk, flowed on, or was it speech entirely, or did it pass at times into song? Shanty of the sailors weighing the dripping anchor, sonorous hum of the shrouds in a tearing northeaster, ballad of the fisherman hauling his nets at sundown against an apricot sky, chords of guitar and mandolin from gondola or cake. Did it change into the cry of the wind, plaintive at first, angrily shrill as it freshened, rising to a tearing whistle, sinking to a musical trickle of air from the leach of the bellying sail? All these sounds the spellbound listener seemed to hear, and with them the hungry complaint of the gulls, and the sea mews, the soft thunder of the breaking wave, the cry of the protesting shingle. Back into speech again it passed, and with beating heart he was following the adventures of a dozen seaports, the fights, the escapades, the rallies, the comradeships, the gallant undertakings. Or he searched islands for treasure, fished in still lagoons, and dozed day long on warm white sand. Of deep-sea fishings he heard tell, and mighty silver gatherings of the mile-long net, of sudden perils, noise of breakers on a moonless night, or the tall bows of the great liner taking shape overhead through the fog. That's frightening. Of the merry home-coming, the headland rounded, the harbour lights opened out. The groups seen dimly on the quay, the cheery hail, the splash of the hawser, the trudge up the steep little street towards the comforting glow of red-curtained windows. Lastly, in his waking dream it seemed to him that the adventurer had risen to his feet, but was still speaking, still holding him fast with his sea-grey eyes. And now, he was softly saying, I take to the road again, holding on south-westwards for many a long and dusty day, till at last I reach the little grey sea-town I know so well, that clings along one steep side of the harbour. There, through dark doorways, you look down flights of stone steps, overhung by great pink tufts of valerian, and ending in a patch of sparkling blue water. The little boats that lie tethered to the rings and stanchions of the old sea-wall are gaily painted as those I clambered in and out of in my own childhood. The salmon leap on the flood tide. Schools of mackerel flash and play past quaysides and foreshores, and by the windows the great vessels glide night and day, up to their moorings or forth to the open sea. There, sooner or later, the ships of all seafaring nations arrive, and there, at its destined hour, the ship of my choice will let go its anchor. I shall take my time. I shall tarry and bide, till at last the right one lies waiting for me, warped out into midstream, loaded low, her bowsprit pointing down harbour. I shall slip on board by boat or a long hawser, and then one morning I shall wake to the song and tramp of the sailors, the clink of the capstan, and the rattle of the anchor chain coming merrily in. We shall break out the jib and the foresail. The white houses on the harbour side will glide slowly past us as she gathers steering way, and the voyage will have begun. As she forges towards the headland, she will clothe herself with canvas, and then once outside, the sounding slap of great green seas as she heels to the wind, pointing south. And you will come too, young brother, for the days pass and never return, and the south still waits for you. Take the adventure, heed the call, now ere the irrevocable moment passes. 'Tis but a banging of the door behind you, a blithesome step forward, and you are out of the old life and into the new. Then some day, long hence, jog home here if you will, when the cup has been drained and the play has been played, and sit down by your quiet river with a store of goodly memories for company. You can easily overtake me on the road, for you are young, and I am aging, and go softly. I will linger and look back, and at last I will surely see you coming, eager and light-hearted, with all the south in your face." The voice died away, and ceased as an insect's tiny trumpet dwindles swiftly into silence, and the water rat, paralysed and staring, saw at last but a distant speck on the white surface of the road. Mechanically he rose and proceeded to repack the luncheon basket, carefully and without haste. Mechanically he returned home, gathered together a few small necessities and special treasures he was fond of, and put them in a satchel, acting with slow deliberation, moving about the room like a sleepwalker, listening ever with parted lips. He swung the satchel over his shoulder, carefully selected a stout stick for his wayfaring, and with no haste, but with no hesitation at all, he stepped across the threshold just as the mole appeared at the door. "Why, where are you off to, Ratty?" asked the mole in great surprise, grasping him by the arm. "Going south with the rest of them," murmured the rat in a dreamy monotone, never looking at him. "Seawards first, and then on shipboard, and so to the shores that are calling me." He pressed resolutely forward, still without haste, but with dogged fixity of purpose. But the mole, now thoroughly alarmed, placed himself in front of him and looking into his eyes, saw that they were glazed and set and turned a streaked and shifting grey. Not his friend's eyes, but the eyes of some other animal. Grappling with him strongly, he dragged him inside, threw him down and held him. The rat struggled desperately for a few moments, and then his strength seemed suddenly to leave him, and he lay still and exhausted, with closed eyes, trembling. Presently the mole assisted him to rise and placed him in a chair, where he sat collapsed and shrunken into himself, his body shaken by a violent shivering, passing in time into a hysterical fit of dry sobbing. Mole made the door fast, threw the satchel into a drawer and locked it, and sat down quietly on the table by his friend, waiting for the strange seizure to pass. Gradually the rat sank into a troubled doze, broken by starts and confused murmurings of things strange and wild and foreign to the unenlightened mole, and from that he passed into a deep slumber. Very anxious in mind, the mole left him for a time and busied himself with household matters, and it was getting dark when he returned to the parlour, and found the rat where he had left him, wide awake indeed, but listless, silent, and dejected. He took one hasty glance at his eyes, found them to his great satisfaction clear and dark, and brown again as before, and then sat down and tried to cheer him up, and help him to relate what had happened to him. Poor Ratty did his best by degrees to explain things, but how could he put into cold words what had mostly been suggestion? How recall for another's benefit the haunting sea voices that had sung to him? How reproduce at second hand the magic of the seafarer's 100 reminiscences? Even to himself, now the spell was broken and the glamour gone, he found it difficult to account for what had seemed some hours ago the inevitable and only thing. It is not surprising, then, that he failed to convey to the mole any clear idea of what he had been through that day. To the mole this much was plain. The fit or attack had passed away and had left him sane again, though shaken, and cast down by the reaction. But he seemed to have lost all interest for the time in the things that went to make up his daily life, as well as in all pleasant forecastings of the altered days and doings that the changing season would surely bring. Casually then, and with seeming indifference, the mole turned his talk to the harvest that was being gathered in, the towering wagons and their straining teams, the growing ricks, and the large moon rising over bare acres dotted with sheaves. He talked of the reddening apples around, of the browning nuts, of jams and preserves, and the distilling of cordials, till by easy stages such as these he reached midwinter, its hearty joys and its snug home life, and then he became simply lyrical. By degrees the rat began to sit up and join in. His dull eye brightened, and he lost some of his listening air. Presently the tactful mole slipped away and returned with a pencil and a few half-sheets of paper, which he placed on the table at his friend's elbow. "It's quite a long time since you did any poetry," he remarked. "You might have a try at it this evening, instead of, brooding over things so much. I've an idea you'll feel a lot better when you've got something jotted down, if it's only just the rhymes." The rat pushed the paper away from him wearily, but the discreet mole took occasion to leave the room, and when he peeped in again some time later, the rat was absorbed and deaf to the world, alternately scribbling and sucking the top of his pencil. It is true that he sucked a good deal more than he scribbled, but it was joy to the mole to know that the cure had at least begun. And that's the end of chapter 9, and it's after 4 o'clock. So I think we'll pause there. The next chapter is 10, The Further Adventures of Toad. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. And I'll catch up on what you've been saying to me. Lemon, was that you having a drink of water? Or was that talking about what I was drinking? Actually, mine is water. Yeah, that chapter is, if you're reading it in an unedited, unabridged version of the book, that's quite an odd chapter for a children's book, because it doesn't really relate to the characters that we know and the lives that they're living. So I know that one of the versions of the story that I read when I was quite young, once I was reading, I'm pretty sure that chapter they made reference to it, but they didn't go into anywhere near as much detail as that. And the drawing, the tugging at Water Rat in himself to want to go and explore these places and things like that, because it's a little hard to explain to a child what that sort of thing is that's happening, where something catches your imagination and gets you so caught up in it that the world that you're used to loses any appeal. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was not a section of the book that was read to you, or the version of it that your parents had that were reading to you wasn't one. And yes, The Adventures of Toad. Oh my goodness, what a character. Yes, full bore, all or nothing. Absolutely devastated with how life is going, and then on top of the world the next moment, and seeing if he can dupe somebody into something. Oh dear, please don't be Toad. So we'll see what the next thing is that's going to happen next time we read, which will be, excuse me, I've got an itchy nose and my nose ring keeps turning, the stud keeps turning around. Next time should be, if you're listening to this live, should be Friday, because today's Wednesday. So it should be Friday at 3 p.m. I will try to tweet about it, and I will try to also put a comment on it, probably in Discord, if I can figure out how to actually get it automated. Otherwise, if I remember, I'll just type it in. So yeah, it should be 3 o'clock New Zealand time here on Friday for The Further Adventures of Toad. And it looks like we're about 2/3 of the way through the story, maybe 3/4. Who was the hedgehog? I I can't remember at the moment. But then part of my mind mixes up some of the Beatrix Potter stories with memories of the Wind and the Willows stories. And I know there's a hedgehog in there. Or several. But there may be a hedgehog still coming in the story. A little young one, I think. I'm not sure. Anyway, I hope to catch you all. And hopefully, yes, Joel will be around or chatting or something. And we'll also look into, for those who are watching this chat later, we'll look into what the auto modding is happening on the chat so that you don't get too many comments deleted and don't get paused or booted, hopefully. So, yep, see you next time. Thank you for tuning in and listening, and don't forget to drink lots of water and enjoy your stories. Bye all.